Good afternoon and welcome to the latest Leaders Live webinar. My name is James Turgoose. I'm a Senior Partner at Helen Strategy and I'm delighted to be hosting today's session on behalf of Leaders Live. Leaders Live is all about debate and discussion and ensuring that our audience are at the centre of our debates. That's why we encourage you to get involved today and submit your questions to us in the chat function available. I will then put as many questions as I can to our panellists later in the session. We will also be inviting the audience to take part in a series of polling questions that will appear throughout the event, so do keep an eye out for those as well. So I think we're set for a really good event today, and firstly I would like to introduce all of our panellists and invite them to briefly say hello. Could I start with you, Peter?
Thanks, James. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Stevens. I'm the Head of UK External and Government Affairs for Nissan. And in the context of this afternoon's discussion, I'm also a member of the Green Jobs Task Force that was announced by the government last month. That's looking to inform the net zero strategy around particularly how do we create green jobs and the skills that we're going to need for net zero. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Could I now introduce Helen to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Helen Dalton. I'm a relationship manager and I work at the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. I work with employers building apprenticeship standards in engineering and manufacturing, but particularly in automotive. And I also work with the digital sector. And I'm here today because I'm also working on our Green Apprenticeship project. And we're part of the Cross Whitehall group that support the work that Peter does. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. And next, Kevin, could I ask you to say hello?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Kelly. I'm the Automotive Aftermarket Sales Director and Technical Service Director for Robert Bosch in the UK and Ireland. I'm in a fortunate position while Bosch is very much at the forefront of automotive technology, working with companies such as Peter's. I'm also responsible for the aftermarket, where we're at the nuts and bolts of the independent aftermarket, and I'm responsible for delivering training services, including apprenticeships, to the UK and Ireland, and I'm an ex-apprentice myself, so a subject and a topic I'm very passionate about.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And finally, but by no means least, Toby, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, James. So my name's Toby Perkins. Sorry, voice gave up exactly the wrong moment there. My name's Toby Perkins. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Chesterfield. I'm also the Shadow Apprenticeship and Lifelong Learning Minister. I've been in that post since Keir Starmer was elected leader of the party back in April. As a party that have a strong focus on the green industrial revolution and the Green New Deal, it's really important that our future skills policy coincides, works well with our policy on devolution and on the kind of industry and economy we want. So this is a really useful discussion for us to be having right now.
Great, thanks, Toby. And I know that you will probably have to leave us halfway through the session because of votes in Parliament this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. So probably about 2:30, I'm afraid, yeah.
No problem at all. So thank you all for those introductions. Let's go straight into the discussion. Clearly, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan announcement recently to achieve net zero by 2050 and the associated measures around that has provoked many people to ask, how will we get there? A key part of that is going to be to ensure that we have the skills that we need. The CBI has estimated that the skills gap might cost the economy £13 billion a year by 2030, and 9 out of 10 workers are going to require new skills. So how can we start to reduce this gap? So Peter, maybe I could start with you, given your role in the Green Jobs Task Force. Do we have a skills gap and what should we do about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's very much at the heart of the Green Jobs Task Force. I mean, I think ultimately we will have a skills gap because in some ways at the moment we have a technology gap as well. I mean, at the moment, if we look at how we're going to deliver net zero, there are some areas where we do have clear visibility on some of the technologies and therefore some of the skills that are going to be critical for that. So in the automotive sector, we know the direction of travel that we're going in. As part of the 10-point plan, there was the announcement around electric vehicles. So we know that's one direction that we're going in. But in other areas, I think that there are still some real questions about what are the technologies that are going to be required to decarbonise. So I know, for example, in some of the other modes of transport, there are some more questions about how do we decarbonise aviation, how do we decarbonise maritime, and we're going to have a transport decarbonisation plan next year that's going to set some of that out. So I think we know where we can see a technology roadmap. I think we therefore can be cracking on with the skills challenge that goes with that. But I know that there will be other technologies that we don't yet have full visibility on, where we will then need the skills to underpin that.
Thanks, Peter. Helen, could I get your initial thoughts on those questions as well?
Yeah. So as a relationship manager working with Automotive, it's been a real pleasure to hear everybody talking about the evolving discussion around what green apprenticeships people are going to need. But as Peter says, I think it's still very unclear what exactly the job roles are that people are looking to fill in any great number. So from an institute perspective, we're waiting for their call. And I guess you're going to hear me saying this every 5 minutes in this call, is where people have an idea of a job role that they think that they're not getting an apprenticeship available for. If they come to the institute, I can help them find either something that's going to be suitable, or we can talk about whether we need to build something afresh. But as Peter was saying before, it's really unclear at the moment whether we should be building hundreds of new apprenticeships for all these amazing new technologies that people are imagining, or whether we genuinely have some gaps that can't be filled with what we've already got online.
Yeah. And maybe a question for Toby, your reflections on that, but also, is there a disconnect between what politicians and government are saying in speeches and in white papers and so forth, and the reality on the ground? What do you think needs to happen practically? Sorry, Toby, I think your camera's on, your microphone's on mute.
Sorry, we should all be used to this by now, shouldn't we? Yeah, I think there is a disconnect, to start with your second question first, between the rhetoric, particularly on skills from my perspective, but also around the environment, and what is being delivered on the ground and the reality of policy on the ground. I think the sort of the starting point of our approach to much of this is a cross-governmental approach that sees skills not as an isolated standalone area, further education standalone isolated area, but firstly as part of a system that sees schools and universities and further education all as paths along a route, rather than necessarily contradictory and sometimes competing institutions, and that education and skills more generally works hand in hand with policy and on the kind of industrial strategy and economy that we want to be, what that means in terms of our global environmental commitments, what that means in terms of welfare policy and how we remove those barriers that keep people from improving themselves, and how that money gets from central government into delivery in our local economies. And I think that the issue of place is incredibly important for this. So I think that, you know, too much of skills policy has been taken in a sort of isolation of all of those other areas that are crucial to it being successful. And of course, industry is an incredibly important part of that, and working well with industry is an important part of that. But I think that the current approach of apprenticeship levy, and whilst I support the levy in itself, means that government's really largely washed its hands of what gets taught now. And so I think a balance that sees the crucial role that existing businesses and industries play in identifying where there's a lack of skills, but also enables local communities, local devolved powers, and government to have a say about the labour market needs of its workforce in general and young people in particular.
Absolutely. Kevin, could I ask you to let us sort of have your initial thoughts on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I pick on something Peter said, where, you know, the roadmap for known technology is pretty clear. You know, companies plan 5-10 years in advance manufacturing plants. We know the platforms of the future and the associated technologies. But I'm just going to give a reality check here to everybody that there's fundamental skill gaps today in modern current vehicles, let alone autonomous, self-driving, connected cars, carbon-free, pollution-free. It's a defined roadmap of technology, but it's not a defined roadmap of how we fill those skills gaps. And today, there's already challenges for training providers, especially independent, service providers, outside of the main dealer networks, that have to cope with multiple brands, multiple technologies. Nissan's version of hybrid is different to another manufacturer's car of hybrid. So I think, what we're seeing at the ground level is a real disconnect between the government's words and the government's actions in terms of funding the right level of training, the right type of training. And also there's a stigma with engineering still from schools. So we're not getting the right candidates, and it's something that really frustrates me. The skill level for an automotive technician or an aviation technician or, any kind of engineering is off the scale. It's a phenomenally difficult job. And we're not getting the best candidates right at the root source of the problem. And then down the line, transferring people in and out from other industries, there's no incentive to do that in automotive as well. So I think there's a few practical areas there we really need to think about and put some defined plans in to match the technology roadmap that Peter describes.
Thanks, Kevin. I think that's a good moment for us to have the first polling question of our audience this afternoon, which will be appearing on people's screens shortly. And whilst that poll takes place, which is to ask people what they think the most important factors are in ensuring that the UK has the skills to achieve net zero by 2050. Toby, could I ask you about the lifetime skills guarantee? I know the government have been pushing this quite hard. I think there was a statement yesterday by the Education Secretary. Is the lifetime skills guarantee a good initiative? Is that something which is helping to address the problem?
Well, I would say that we had a lifetime skills guarantee, the ability for people to study up to level 3 existed prior to 2011, and so we were critical of it being removed, and so of course I'm pleased to see it return. I think that already there are question marks about the extent to which to its breadth. So if, for example, you've done an A-level, you've done A-levels, and at some stage in the future you want to retrain, that's whether in whatever sector it is, the lifetime skills guarantee wouldn't apply to you because you've already got a level 3 qualification. There's many areas that aren't covered by the lifetime skills guarantee. So anything in retail, anything in the arts, anything in hospitality. So it's very much chosen particular areas that it wants to drive people towards, and I think that's a mistake. I think that the breadth of opportunities that there are shouldn't be being restricted in this, and I think that people take very circuitous paths sometimes in their careers, and to have a situation that says, well, once you've done A-levels, you couldn't, the government will never support you to retrain is very much mistaken. So in itself, totally support the principle, but I think that unnecessary limitations have been placed in making it work at this stage. I suspect that as we go forward, they'll change, and you'll see the government free it up. But I wish they'd do that sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. So the results of the poll are kind of emerging on screen, and it seems as though people do think that it is up to the government to do more to support and to take the lead, along with school initiatives. So that's an interesting reflection. That in fact that's just getting stronger as the poll continues to run. So thank you for those members of the audience who are taking part. Clearly the impact of COVID-19 on the apprenticeship sector has been unprecedented, and all the stats are showing there's been a fall in the number of apprenticeships this year, which is probably not surprising. But Kevin, you're as an ex-apprentice yourself, as you said, keen to get your reflections on building what you said a moment ago about where apprenticeships, how they're perceived, and what needs to be done to support them. Yeah,
I think if we talk about the COVID impacts, that's added a huge stress to an already, I would say, struggling, if not failing, apprenticeship structure and funding structure. So what we've seen in engineering and manufacturing is over a 40% drop in the period of March to July this year compared to the period last year, which was already down. So COVID just accelerated those trends that we were already seeing, which is not great for the country, and certainly not for our sector and the country as a whole. So I think hopefully we're coming through that, and great news in Coventry this week, which is just up the road from me, about the great work our medical teams have done in the vaccine, and we can see a light at the end of that tunnel. But don't let COVID, be the smokescreen to a system that I think was already failing. And when we look at the rules for funding for apprenticeships and what's eligible for a training provider and an employer, on the current estimates, it's over 20% of the genuine delivery costs that a training provider needs to put in place to give a good quality apprenticeships are ineligible for funding. They're just not allowed to be claimed. I understand the government wants transparency and open book accounting on taxpayers' money. I don't think you'll find a single training provider or employer who's not prepared to do that. But we really are fighting with one hand tied behind our backs here with the funding, and the risk is fewer apprentices and lower quality, which nobody wants.
We've touched on the apprenticeship levy already. I mean, Toby, potentially one for your reflections on the levy itself. Do you think it has worked in terms of delivering the numbers and the quality of apprenticeships that we need?
Sorry, was this up to me?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Apologies. Well, I mean, so has it worked? The first thing I would say is that I think the apprenticeship levy is primarily a taxation policy. It shouldn't be the thing that drives your skills and apprenticeship policy. So, as a way of allocating specific monies to ensure they get spent on the next generation, that was, reasonably effective doing that. I think that for government to respond to that by withdrawing all their own funding, or most of their own funding for apprenticeships, was a huge mistake. And it means that lots of SMEs are now shut out of it. Many communities, like in Chesterfield, we haven't got many large employers. Apprenticeships are way down because small businesses find partly the funding's not there, and partly the apprenticeship field just feels so complicated for them that they have exited the environment. So I wouldn't advocate getting rid of the apprenticeship levy, but I think it's led to a big increase in the amount of the apprenticeship budget that is being spent on existing employees, often at level 4, level 5, because many of the people many of the businesses that have this levy pot haven't got enough new recruits to spend it on, and so they end up allocating it towards training. Now, further skilling up your existing staff is a perfectly sensible thing to do in terms of UK productivity. But the net result is apprenticeship numbers for 16 to 19-year-olds are falling. So, in itself, I would say as a policy, it has merit, but it shouldn't be the thing that drives all of your skills policy.
Peter, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. I think for us, we've been committed for apprenticeships all the way along, and like Kevin, many of our senior management team started out as apprenticeships and have seen their career go all the way through. So I think it's something that we were doing already, and I think the concern is to get the system to work properly. A number of changes have already been made to put more flexibility in there, but I do echo Kevin's concern around the cost cap on some of the more technical apprenticeships, because I think we're seeing as vehicles get more and more complex, as you get more and more systems coming in, whether they're electrical systems or autonomous systems, that means that the materials costs and the costs of delivering a high quality apprenticeship goes up. And I think ultimately we want to make sure that the money that we put into the apprenticeship levy pot then gets used to deliver the high quality apprentices that we need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Helen, what about from your perspective, and the Green Apprenticeship Advisory Panel that you mentioned earlier? Presumably that's part of the solution here, isn't it?
Definitely. As a relationship manager working with engineering and automotive standards, I definitely find we struggle to engage very much with our small and medium enterprise automotive businesses, and that's a real shame. I think moving online a lot more following COVID, we've been able to try and engage with people a lot more, because obviously any time spent away from a small business can be catastrophic for those people, but it's vital we get those voices in, because then they're helping build the supply chain. And part of the work that we're doing with the Green Apprenticeship panel is also going to be trying to engage those people into that forum. So if I can explain a bit about the Green Apprenticeship Advisory Panel, it's a group of specialists really from across all different sectors, particularly the ones that BEIS are focused on around the climate change agenda, to help guide the Institute in which apprenticeships we already have on our books, but maybe we need to flex the content a bit more to make it readily available to people in the sector, and where we actually have the gaps and where we actually need to start building brand new apprenticeship standards. So the recruitment's out now, and it closes on Sunday. So anybody out there that's interested in joining, please do get in touch. And we're also looking for people to join the wider community. We're going to sort of have a jammy donut model. So we'll have all the people that understand are going to make decisions in the middle, but around there'll be a nice big ring of extra sort of special stakeholders that we can go to and consult. So we're making really good evidence-based decisions about what we need to be focusing our time and energy on, because the Institute is quite a small department compared to some of the larger ones out there. So we want to make sure that we can deliver this stuff quickly and in time, rather than how some products sometimes come out which can take a number of years, and those that have worked on apprenticeships would have had that experience, I'm sure, at times.
James, can I just cheekily jump in there and kind of come off the back of Helen's plea there for input? So the Green Jobs Task Force, the stage we're at the moment, is looking to gather evidence about where the challenges are and where we think the skills gaps are going to come. So again, to the audience out there, we'd really value your input in that. Obviously, coming from an automotive sector, we've got some good voices there, but we're conscious that actually some of the technologies that are going to deliver net zero are a twinkle in an eye at the moment, or are perhaps at a less advanced state of development. So it's really important, particularly from smaller businesses and from innovators, that we get your views on the skills that we're going to be required for the green jobs in the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter. That's well, it sounds like this is ideal timing then for people to get involved.
James, can I just come back on a couple of points? One from Toby, one from Helen. I think that Toby's comments on the levy I tend to agree with. I think the other area that the levy can be improved is allow employers to use it for their value chain, because even big organisations don't necessarily have the number of apprentices that they want, that the levy could fund, but their suppliers, their partner organisations who all add value to their value chain. And if I take, Nissan's a good example. They've got the Nissan headquarters, then you've got the dealer groups who are separate, then you've got independent dealers, the suppliers to those workshops. So there's a really smart way we can use that levy money rather than just get it sucked back into the treasury. So I think that's something, Toby, I'd ask you to consider, please. And then Helen, you mentioned small to medium-sized companies engaging with apprenticeships. It's been a nightmare for them because of the complexity. So they look to companies like us and other training providers and their sponsoring group, and we've gone, we don't know. We don't know how this is going to work. We don't know. So it's just made a tough situation even worse. So again, let's keep it simple. That's my mantra in business, and we've not done that for the SMEs. So we need to really work together to make that better.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I've been talking very much to colleagues in the National Apprenticeship Service and at ESFA about how we can join up better to support small and medium businesses in particular, because I think anybody that's looked at how you register for an apprenticeship and the bureaucracy that's involved, it can be quite overwhelming when your day job is keeping your business afloat.
And we just want them to focus on mentoring the young person and giving them the skills and the support. They outsource the admin to us. That's where we fit in the role, or their sponsoring business. So I think there has to be some improvements there. So it's great. We should focus on that.
Definitely.
Thanks, Kevin. I guess Toby, be interested in your reflections on that. But also, is this saying that we need a cross-departmental apprenticeship strategy, and that we don't get bogged down in it only being one department within government that is responsible for driving apprenticeships?
I think my view on that is that probably it is the responsibility of the education department to drive apprenticeships, but that they have to be cognizant of what the industrial and economic strategy of the country is, and the two have to work hand in hand. And I think that businesses of all sizes play an incredibly important part in that. So it's not so much about responsibility for delivery, but about making sure that your policies add up. And I mean, the current Education Secretary is on record of wanting a more German-style apprenticeship and skills approach. But the things that make the German approach, firstly, policies that really drive manufacturing and really encourage manufacturing, which we don't have in a variety of different ways, a very much more devolved local government structure that really pushes responsibility out into the regions and gets decisions made much closer. That's going in the opposite direction to what our government is doing. So you can't have the German skills approach if your entire other parts of that approach are contradictory. So I think that's what I'd say on that aspect, particularly. I think more generally, employers are incredibly important stakeholders in knowing what their businesses are likely to need, recognizing what that is going to look like as it comes out of our education system, and they should be encouraged to help locally their education delivery to aim delivery along those kinds of lines, and then it's for government to decide how it gets money from central government to ensure that it delivers apprenticeships, and the issues we've just raised about small business is just one example of an example of how that isn't working. So and to work out what the actual academic part of that looks like. Businesses know what they want their potential employees to be capable of doing, and it's government's job to get them to that point.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Before we come on to sort of a more specific conversation around automotive apprenticeships in particular, is there anything else that, in terms of a green industrial revolution, which the government are talking about, employers and organisations need to work with the government on in terms of delivering, because clearly everyone's talking here about the types of skills which we're going to need in the next 15 to 20 years, but are there other sort of practical things which we need to be taking into account? Maybe, I don't know, Peter, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'm conscious Toby's got to go and vote in a moment. There was a couple of things I wanted to pick up on that I thought were really good points. I think the point he made earlier on about the role of place is really important, and I think we do have to think about the clusters and that are starting to emerge around net zero technologies, and I think there will be clusters around the UK, and I think we should go with that. We should work with local enterprise partnerships, with local industries, where those clusters form, to look at the skills we put in place around that. I think the other point Toby was just making is about needing to engage with the education system and employers supporting the education system. And this links to place. So some of the work we've been doing, we have a Nissan Skills Foundation that works with local schools, particularly with primary school children, because we think we have to get in there at primary stage and enthuse children about the potential great opportunities that they have in engineering, about the importance of STEM subjects, about raising aspiration. So I think there are some things there, and it'd be great if government could get behind that, work with us in encouraging that kind of early engagement in the school system by employers to raise that aspiration.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think we would support any initiative like that, Pete. I think you'd find a whole raft of organisations who would jump at the chance to, wave the flag about our industries and how exciting and sexy they are, because there's some really clever things going on which really excite school children. So we need to do that. Again, Grumpy Kev, back to reality. We've had a real trouble getting, inside the school gates at that stage. It's been, for lots of good reasons, but there needs to be, some way of getting, that message is some practical examples, demonstrations, and Helen, you've touched on it now with the digital world. Everybody's on Teams or Zoom. We can show really exciting things in 15 minutes, and it can be broadcast to thousands of people, and just plant that seed with a young person that, maybe further education is not the right route, maybe it is vocational. And as I think Toby said earlier, then we can come back around, and I want to see more and more people going from industries to skill sets, because to work on a vehicle, yes, you need mechanical skills, engineering skills, but we're into quantum computing now on the security of those vehicles, and they're doing 150 mile an hour around corners with the kids in the back. What's more exciting than that? Managing that and keeping that safe. So, we need to see more transferability between industries and sectors as well.
Thanks, Kevin. Toby, I know you might have to leave us at some point soon. We have received our first question from a member of the audience, who says that a recent report has shown that young people decide their careers as early as 8 or 9 years old, but don't pick the right subjects to support their aspirations. How can we help schools give the right advice? Helen, maybe you want to start your reflections on that.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. We're coming from a position where going to university is everybody's first thought. And even when I picked my daughter up from primary school, that's what parents are talking about. And obviously as an RM for apprenticeships, I'm incredibly passionate, and I'm always going on about, it's that vocational route that's so key. So I do think it's a matter of us building it into that education system where people are talking about what options can you do. And I think as well, thinking about the gender diversity in engineering and manufacturing. We look at the statistics for all of our apprenticeships, we get the figures through, and E&M still struggles. Digital also has issues, but funnily enough, data analyst and business analyst, they seem to attract a more even split across gender. So I do wonder, as engineering moves more into that digital space, more data analytics, more analytical roles, there'll be an easier route in for girls to see that there's a future in engineering, rather than in the days when it was seen as a dark and dirty kind of occupation. But yeah, as I say, I think fundamentally it's got to come down to every single one of us talking about apprenticeships as being something that we want our children to do, not somebody else's children to do. And that's a conversation we often have at the Institute amongst ourselves. We should never be creating anything that we wouldn't want our own children to do.
Toby, your thoughts on those national careers?
My final contribution on this. I think that certainly there are children who decide the careers as early as 8 or 9. I certainly wasn't one of them, and I think and lots of other people aren't. And I think for what we should be wanting to do is to have careers guidance in school, which I think is a huge absence. And I think certainly at slightly later ages, I take Helen's point entirely that we should have a really aspirational approach towards apprenticeships, that we should be able to make the argument that leaving school at 16 or 18, going into the workplace, doesn't mean that you don't get a degree, that apprenticeships can very much lead you towards higher education, but probably lead you there with a lot less debt. But also our education system needs to be recognising that loads of people will have 8 or 9 different careers over the course of their lives, and it is about enabling them to leave our education system with a toolbox that will enable them to go in a variety of different directions, rather than seeing each thing that we study is purely leading us towards the job that we're going to end up doing. So I think that's a very outdated view of what our workplaces are like. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there because we've got the bell going now. But thank you very much for the invitation to come on and to everyone for the contributions they've been making. Lindsay, my staff members on the call, and she'll continue to make notes about other things that are said. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Toby. Kevin, I wondered if, throwing that question at you, were you deciding at the age of 8 or 9 what subjects to do?
Some people say I'm not an adult yet at the age of 47, people close to me. I didn't. I had no idea. I'd seen friends and family members predominantly go into the world of work, and those lucky enough to get an apprenticeship. And certainly a cousin of mine was very, two cousins were very, very strong in that. And so I followed that route because I looked at what an apprenticeship could give. At that time, it was a 5-year apprenticeship, and it covered everything. So probably the best thing that it did, as well as the training and the vocation, was I spent 3 to 6 months in every department in a big organisation. So I got a great, by the age of 20, 21, I had a much better picture because I'd seen accounts, I'd seen the foundry, I'd seen production, I'd seen, sales and marketing, and I had a really good idea that actually I think I want to go that way. But go back 5 years before that, or 8 years old, I wanted to be a footballer. Still do. But so I think Toby's point, we do create a lot of cul-de-sacs. If you go down that route, if you choose that subject at school, that's the way you're going. So I think there needs to be a look at educational policy that says, let's keep some topics on the agenda, whether it is, new technology or looking at the new. You'll need to look at the technology section on the internet and say, whether it's Tim Peake, when the impact he had on schools and got people interested in STEM, whether it's quantum computing or zero carbon. We need to keep a space for that in the school world that isn't necessarily a qualification. It's just an understanding that allows people to go into the next step. And that's all it is. It's the next step. It's not the final career point.
Can I come in on that point? Because I think there's a couple of really interesting points there. I think one is the whole net zero agenda is really a great opportunity to capture young people and catch their imagination. Younger folk are so much more environmentally conscious, I think, and this is something that I think they can get behind and see a real value in their career. So I think there's a real opportunity to engage young people in a way around green jobs. That is a real opportunity for us. But I wanted to pick up on Kevin's point about lifelong learning and just the importance of being able to reskill. I think one of the challenges we see with the automotive industry is that we have around about 35,000 people in the UK who make internal combustion engines, and they've been trained in and qualified to make internal combustion engines. Now, ultimately, in the next 10 years, that is going to end. And so we're going to need to retrain those people and yes, apprenticeships for those who are coming into the workplace, but actually for some of those who are already in the workplace, we need to think about how we can retrain and update their training for the new technologies that are going to be required. And so I think the concern I have is that we don't have one size fits all approach that says it must be an apprenticeship and it must look like this. We need to provide different routes that enable those who are mid-career, who've got loads of experience in a certain technology, to be able to retrain and transition to new technologies.
Yeah, and there should be support available to help them do that. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to argue with one point, Peter. I know we're friends, really, but you talk about the internal combustion engine. So by 2030, all vehicles sold and manufactured in 2030, 76% will still have an internal combustion engine. So that technology is not dead. Of course, the green technology, fuel cells, hybrid, electric, etc., is rapidly growing, which is fantastic and exciting, and we need to embrace it. But the skills that those people have learned are not going to be abandoned, because those cars are going to be on the road for 10, 15 years to come. We're all going to be driving them. Our families, our friends are going to be driving them. So those skills aren't lost. They're still there. They're fundamental. We're just adding on top. I think that's the point you're making, Peter. It's adding to the skill set of those individuals, which is essential for us.
Yeah, and I think the concern is there are going to be some technologies which we can see are going to be transitioning out of the market. And we need to manage that process. And I think it's one thing to, when you're talking to a school leaver and say, here, we need to go down a training route and these are the skills that you're going to require. I'm very conscious that if you're dealing with someone who's got 25 years, fantastic experience of being really high performing in the workplace, how are we going to incentivize them and encourage them to develop new skills throughout their career? And it comes back to this whole point about lifelong learning, that it isn't something that you train up at the beginning of your career. We need to create a culture that actually supports and incentivizes and rewards that ongoing lifelong learning.
Totally agree.
I think we'll get our second polling question up in a moment for the audience. But whilst that's being done, Kevin, you touched on automotive apprenticeships. You've got an apprenticeship background yourself. I think it'd be helpful for the audience if you could, you and Peter could set out why are automotive and similar apprenticeships so expensive to run and to deliver?
Yeah, obviously I'll speak from automotive experience, but other industries, similar technology. I think we've touched on one of the major factors already. It's just the speed of technology. That technology tidal wave that's been going on for 20 years. From ABS, steering, electronic steering, the computerization of the vehicle, ECUs. A modern, a Mark 6 Golf can have over 60 PCs on it. Computers on it. It's a phenomenal piece of engineering. So that's always been there. So keeping abreast of that. Investing in the equipment you need to deliver the training, the vehicles. Peter's in a fortunate position. His training program's only for Nissan, so he can get Nissan vehicles. When you're talking about an independent, they could be touching 20, 30 brands of vehicle. So to have the equipment in the training centre and refreshing that, because there's only so many times you can take a piece of equipment on or off. So you isn't just buy a vehicle that lasts for 10 years. You've got to refresh it, because as you're teaching the young people the practical skills, things get knocked off. That's what you want them to. You want them to break it in the college or the training centre, because they don't do it in the real world. There's only so many times you can paint, spray a panel, before you have to replace it. So the capital investment in the equipment is phenomenal, and the ongoing training of our trainers is phenomenal. We have to submit to so many days because they're facing the same challenges as the providers. So facilities, equipment, training cost for our own trainers. It's a very expensive activity, and the current rules, and again, I'm not going to put Helen and her departmental colleagues under pressure, they're just not covered. So even organisations the size of Bosch and Nissan, we're really struggling to cover those costs. And it's having a detrimental effect on the image and the success and the quality of apprenticeships, James. Peter, Helen, sorry, carry on.
Yeah.
I just want to reassure Kevin. A number of times we've been speaking to our colleagues in ESFA with the funding rules, feeding back all of this information that people are telling us that the funding rules are causing these kind of issues. And I know that ESFA are having a reflective moment, is what I'll call it, about this kind of thing. And I know that 2021 we may be hearing something from them about what that's led to. But I think what that tells me as a relationship manager is it really matters when you guys all speak with the same voice and say the same thing. This isn't right. Because I think over the years we've heard people going, this doesn't make any sense, it's not helpful. But when people got together and we heard it from a number of different sectors, it kind of has more of an impact. And it's, I think people are really pleased that this approach is being reviewed. What the outcome will be, who knows? But hopefully 2021 we'll get some news on that.
It took us a while to knock on the door, and we finally got. They're listening now, Helen. I'll accept that, and for the benefit of everybody watching, there is some conversations and some. I think there's an acceptance that it's not quite right, which is great. So then hopefully we can move forward. I know, Peter's been active in that as well, so I appreciate it. All the support as a collective industry has been really good.
Yeah. And can I come on that point about the collective industry perspective? Because I think one of the things I'm very conscious of, the Automotive Council, which is the government and industry body that looks at the strategic challenges and the industrial strategy for the sector, produces a international competitiveness survey, which is looking at an industry-wide view of what the industry is saying around the key challenges and how we can be as competitive as possible in a global setting. And one of the issues that comes up every single time and is nearly always top of the list is actually the availability of skilled staff, whether it's maintenance engineers, whether it's graduate tech engineers, whether it's line operational staff. So I think there is a cross-industry view that skills is critical for the industry's competitiveness. And therefore, this is an area that we do want to focus on. We do want to invest our political capital. We do want to invest our own money in producing high-quality apprenticeships, high-quality training for our staff.
Yeah. Peter, you cannot hit a nail with the internet. We need those practical skills still. The internet and digitisation is fantastic, but you cannot physically remove a product, diagnose it, fit it to a vehicle without those practical skills. I think we're all saying that, and I think that's really important. Digitisation is fantastic in the internet, but we need people with these skills, motor skills. It's phenomenally important.
Well, it seems that the audience agrees in many ways that the results of the second polling question, what does the government need to do to support apprenticeships and deliver the skilled workforce of the future? There seems to be a groundswell of support for ensuring that the levy is spent on apprenticeships properly and guaranteeing that training providers are compensated for providing those apprenticeships. So it seems though the audience has listened to the debate very closely, which is excellent. I'd like to just move on in the final 15 minutes to any more questions that we have from our audience. So we have a question which is, what skills that don't exist now are going to be part of an apprenticeship in 2035? Maybe Kevin, you want to kick us off on that one?
Thanks very much. Thank you. Look, I think as these vehicles, I'd probably split it into a couple of areas. So there's the fundamentals, and again, I'll focus on automotive, James, because that's why I'm here, I think, today.
Yeah.
You know, the mathematics and the physics skills, that you know, that fundamental building block that all technology needs to come from. You know, the amount of software code in a modern vehicle is double that of an aeroplane, of a Boeing 747. It's double that, and there's, you know, this amount of source code in there, and that's mathematics and physics. So that's really fundamental. We must have that, you know, much better from school into the vocational programs and into the real world. And I think, as you know, there's going to be lots of technology, but I think connectivity and digitisation, you know, is going to be really important, because these vehicles, not only will they be powered differently, you know, Peter and I have been discussing about fuel cells and hybrid and electrification, they're also going to be nodes on a network. So they're going to be connected to the cloud permanently, sending information back and forth. So diagnostics and preventative maintenance will be done in the cloud. So, but then in between, you're still going to need the practical skills to, okay, the vehicle's told me I've got a problem, how do I fix it? So you're still going to need that middle ground of those fundamental core skills, but the way that the vehicle talks to the technician or the business or the service provider will evolve. So I think opposite end of the spectrum, but with the core skills in the middle that we still.
Helen, what skills do you think we are going to be part of an apprenticeship in 15 years that we don't know exist currently?
I would say whatever skills you guys tell us that should be in there. When I'm working with the Trailblazer groups, it's really important that we keep the knowledge, skills and behaviours as broad as possible to future-proof everything that the standards can offer. And I think what happens is therefore that people like Kevin can go in and use the standards for a range of different technologies and uses. What I think our downfall is, when you look at our apprenticeship standards, they're under occupational titles, which is what we like as civil servants. And within that nest the job roles that people in industry will use. And so what we're going to need to do, I think, is when the skills are evolving, is reflect on whether it's changed the occupation overall or it's just created a new job role within an occupation already, and make sure that the standard that we've created doesn't exclude people from using it. So, for example, we've been talking to the guys who are working on the batteries catapult, and they've been talking to us about whether they need distinct separate battery standards or whether it can live within the work that we've already done. And I think they've broadly come to the conclusion that it lives within the work we've already got. It's just about drawing it out as a job role and making it quite clear that we're not excluding battery technologies from those standards. So it's more of an editing than a completely new revamping, as it were. And that gives me confidence as a relationship manager that this work can be done rather more rapidly than having to write 600 new standards for jobs and skills that don't yet exist. That would be an absolutely terrifying thought, I think, for everybody in industry who would have to supply the experts to advisors.
But to the point we all made earlier, Helen, if somebody's come from an IT background with qualifications in quantum computing and cryptography, and we want them to work on protecting ECUs from being hacked, then that's
how it works. Yeah,
it's how it works. Then bring them across, and there's just a little bit of upskilling. So I think that's got to be, you know, in the mind as well of everybody involved in skill set.
And currently, with the current rules, if you've got 12 months and a day left to train, and you can put your prior learning across, you can move across apprenticeship standards to get people where you need them to be. So, as I say, we've got so many digital standards that I think we've re-engineered them recently on the route review to try and make them more accessible to every sector rather than just being deep tech standards. So hopefully when you guys look at them, you'll say, oh yes, no, we can use one of those in automotive. That will be the plan.
Yeah, sounds good.
And Peter, if you gazing into your own crystal ball for 15 years hence.
I mean, I think I'd agree with the points that both Kevin and Helen have made. I mean, the future of vehicles is going to be autonomous, connected and electric. And I think that is going to mean you're going to need multidisciplinary skills. You're going to need people who are not only mechanical engineers, they're also electrical engineers and they're also software engineers. And I think if I was going to pick out one area that I think will be really important, it is going to be cybersecurity. I think that will be a key key area that will be important, but certainly on the systems integration. I think the other thing I'd flag is something wider than just transport. So I think, we're going to see, as part of net zero, increasing electrification of heat as well as electrification of transport. And I think those electrical skills, those energy system skills, those system integration skills, I think those are going to be highly valuable in the future.
I think that's an excellent moment to bring on in our third polling question, which will be on screen for the audience in a few moments, which touches on which sectors are going to have the biggest within the wider green economy. Which sectors are going to have the biggest opportunities in terms of highly skilled jobs? And as the audience reflect on that question, the biggest challenges and opportunities, is it in offshore wind? Is it in decarbonising heavy industry? Is it in home retrofitting, as you just mentioned, Peter, around heating? Or is it in that transition to electric vehicles? I wonder if it's possible now to sort of look at those sectors, and of course there's other sectors, and have some reflections on where the greatest number of new jobs might come from. Helen, would you like to give us your initial thoughts?
I think from an institute perspective, we're seeing massive opportunities in all of these areas. As I say, for our Green Apprenticeship panel, these are exactly the kind of themes that we're asking the panel to consider, and to reach out to people in the sector to tell us, where do you see the greatest demand? I certainly have had a lot of stuff in my inbox about retrofit, for sure, and whether we've got the right apprenticeship standards out there. And also, as you said before, about progression through from level 2 through to the higher levels. So you're going to need people to consult, you're going to need people to fit. And as I say, in terms of transitions to electric vehicles, for sure, the automotive guys, we know we've got a big job on our hands there to make sure that everything that we create is going to be useful and not going to be a break on what you guys need to try and do in the next 10, 15 years.
Mm. And it's the infrastructure around electric vehicles as well. It isn't just the cars themselves. It's the the charging points, the road infrastructure. You guys know that, but I'm a little bit reluctant to vote because Bosch is active in all of those with Bosch Worcester in terms of home retrofitting and obviously the industry. But I think electric vehicles, because they're so it's such an embedded part of our culture. And I think COVID's actually driven us more that way, and the statistics back that up, that personal use of vehicle was dropping down before for ride sharing and all those kind of things. But since the COVID pandemic, there's been a huge increase in people wanting, and for all the reasons we understand. So, the movement to electric vehicles and the connected vehicle and the autonomous vehicle isn't just about the cars themselves and the technology, it's how it impacts us as car users, as mobility users. So it's going to be a huge impact on our society, not just our industry.
There's a question that's related to that around from somebody in the audience about the Prime Minister's ambition to generate 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen by 2030, and how that could be used in the automotive industry. So I guess a question for both Kevin and Peter to think about, is low carbon hydrogen part of that mix, and how does that affect the skills agenda?
Peter?
Thanks.
There you go first.
That's fine. I mean, I think hydrogen will have a part to play. At the beginning, I said, we have clarity on some of the pathways to net zero. On others, it's less clear. So I think hydrogen will be a part to play in that. It may be in road transport, it may be in aviation, it may be in maritime, but I think hydrogen will play a factor in that. And I think that's one of the areas where I can see some challenges and some opportunities. I mean, looking at the question in front of us around challenges and opportunities, I look at decarbonising heavy industry and think actually there are areas there where we don't yet know what the transition trajectory will be, and hydrogen within that may be part of that solution. I think it's not clear yet, but I think it will be part of the mix.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I think hydrogen will play a part because of its potential benefits are huge. The emissions potential benefits, and how much hydrogen is so available to use as a fuel if we can make the technology work. Which there's been some big breakthroughs recently, and in automotive and other industries. I think synthetic fuels have probably got a part to play as well. There's this assumption that everything's going to be electric or fuel cell, but there's some big improvements in synthetic fuels that will massively reduce emissions and allow the current technologies to maybe have a little bit longer, but whilst also being green and better for the environment. And I think in all major companies have a responsibility for decarbonisation of industry. Again, selfishly, Bosch is committed to being carbon neutral by the end of this year, which for an organisation of our size and the manufacturing might of that company, and it's cost a lot of money, but it's something we stood by and we made that decision. So I'm very proud to be part of an organisation that's done that. But we've got to help others. We've got to share that tech. How did we do it? Let's not keep it inside Bosch. Let's share it with everybody. How did we achieve those goals? So some really big questions and probably not a silver bullet answer, but there we go.
That's very helpful, Kevin. And it looks like our audience for some reason don't think that offshore wind has many challenges and opportunities, and I'm sure the Prime Minister's recent speech where he talks about the UK becoming, I think, the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind, really interesting. So that's an interesting perspective. I don't think we have any more questions from the audience, so I would like to use the last sort of 4 minutes that we have just to get some final reflections from each of you, if that's all right. So I guess my sort of final overarching question to you all is, if you had a magic wand, in terms of 2 or 3 key things that you would want both government and businesses and the Institute, Helen, and organisations to be able to do to make sure we can deliver and have the green skills that we need in the future, what would they be? Maybe I'll start with Peter.
Oh, no time to think there. Thanks a lot. I think a couple of things. I think one is grabbing the opportunity, particularly in primary school. So let's grab hold of the enthusiasm and passion of young people and try and mobilise them and get them engaged on the net zero journey. I think there is something around making sure that the current mechanisms work properly. So the Apprenticeship Levy, higher education, let's make sure that those routes and skills provision routes work well. And then I think the final thing is around lifelong learning, is how do we manage that process where people are developing new skills or where they're transitioning out of one sector into another? How can we incentivise and support them in that transition?
Okay. Helen, how about you?
I've got a very simple wish, really, a Christmas wish. Engagement, really, just massive engagement between employers and industry with the Institute so that we write the right stuff for you guys and that covers the large and the small. We often hear large businesses have written the apprenticeship standards because they've got the resource, and that's why small businesses feel they're not involved. But we know that so many of these green occupations and green tasks that we're going to need to do, retrofitting will be delivered by SMEs coming to your home and fitting your insulation, fitting your smart meters. All those things that are going to happen are going to be done by SMEs. So it is literally just a plea for engagement, and we'll keep it as light touch as we can from government. I think we've been over surveying people, I hear, generally across all government about all things green. I think government will need to join up better at getting those inputs through. To that end, I'm going to tell you we've got our Stakeholder Engagement Survey 2020 live on our Institute website. So anybody that's had any contact with the Institute in the last 12 months, for good or bad, please let us know, because we do need people to tell us where we can improve. And in particular, as I say, with the Green Apprenticeship Advisory Panel and that wider consultative community, it's just a massive plea for people to get involved.
Thanks, Helen. And Kevin, I'll give the last word to you.
Thank you. I think two points, expanding on what Peter said. I think let's make technology engineering exciting for schools and attainable. It doesn't have to be a rigid curriculum. Surely there's a way we can keep that excitement for people, even if they choose a language as GCSE or an A level, then there's something there that just keeps it in their mind right the way through. So I think that engagement with schools in an interesting and exciting way is absolutely critical. to Helen's point, I think there's some topics where the corporate firewalls have to come down and we have to be open. And I think we've proved that on a few topics recently. So, it isn't Nissan, Bosch and whoever else speaking. It's, we're part of this society. We're part of this industry. We want it to be better. And the same goes for government. I'm bored to death of sitting through meetings and saying, well, that's ESF or that's IT. I don't care. We've got to, if we want to make this better, we've got to break down those firewalls in between businesses and between government to get to the right solution for our society and our young people. And then finally, a final claim back to automotive. I'll be grumpy reality, Kev, again. Please, let's keep the dialogue going about those funding situations. Please, Helen, with your colleagues. It is having a massive impact on learner numbers coming through. It's having an impact on the quality we can deliver. And forget the green future. If we can't look after today, then it's an even bigger leap to the future. So let's please keep that going and help us training providers and all the other training providers deliver great apprenticeships for our young people.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody. I'm afraid we are now out of time. We did want to finish properly at 3 p.m. So firstly, thank you to the panelists, including Toby, who had to leave a bit earlier, for their insights and for giving up their time today. It's been a fascinating discussion, and it's been enhanced enormously by the contribution and the engagement from the audience. So thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you again at another Leaders Live event very soon. Thanks very much, and good afternoon.